Alright, so here we're going to take a look at the skull and its bone markings. So here we have the frontal, which is the blue portion of the bone here. This purple portion is the zygomatic bone, which is also our cheekbone. This yellow portion here is the maxilla, which makes up the top portion of our jaw. This pink portion is the sphenoid bone, which we can also see it here on the inside of the eye and on the side of the actual eye. That's why they have it labeled in pink, so that we can see it a little bit more better, as well as you can see it from the inside view of the skull as well. Now taking a look at the frontal portion again. This is in that light purple. It's going to be the bridge of our nose. On the inside of our nose, we have the perpendicular plate as well as the vomer bone, which is the green. And then looking at the side, we have our temporal bone, which is in orange. Our acoustic meatus, which is our inner ear hole, the styloid process, as well as the mastoid process. Here we have the mandible, or our bottom jaw. Looking at the top of the skull, the two green portions are going to be our left and right parietal portions of our skull. And the brown back portion is going to be the occipital portion of our skull. The suture is going to be the lambdoid suture. That's going to separate the parietal bones from the occipital bone. The sagittal is going to separate our two parietals. And then we have a frontal suture, or a coronal suture, and then on the side that separates our parietal from our temporal is going to be our squammal suture. So on our zygomatic bone, we have the temporal process, and on the temporal bone, we have the zygomatic process, which is going to make the prominence of our cheekbone, where this is also where muscles will also attach to as well. If we take another look on the inside of our skull, we can also see that the bones that we see on the outside are going to connect on the inside, so they're all sutured together. You may notice that there's a big hole in the occipital bone, which is going to be our foramen magnum, which is where our spinal cord is going to come through. Then all these little holes that I'm poking are going to be foramen as well, these are going to be passageways for nerves and for blood vessels. If we take a look at the bottom, we can see that these holes go all the way through, like our foramen magnum, which is where our spinal column is going to attach to, as well as our spinal nerves. Now, the temporal bone is a special bone for a reason. If we take a look at an actual skull, the temporal bone is a very, very thin bone. We can almost see my finger on the other side of this bone. It's a very thin bone. If this bone is fractured, or you are hit playing baseball, softball, or any sports, it can cause internal hemorrhaging of the brain and cause a lot of different abnormalities or concussions. So this portion of the brain is a very, very thin portion, so you have to be very careful with any injuries that happen to this portion of the skull. Even though the skull is hard, this portion of the brain or the skull is very, very sensitive and thin. So here we can actually see some sutures. We can see the zygomatic process, as well as the temporal process, the styloid process, the mastoid process. Back here we can see the lambdoid suture, which separates the occipital bone from the parietal bones, as well as we can see that foramen magnum at the very bottom, along with the foramen that's going to allow for nerves and vessels to come into the cranium. Here we can also see the nose, the ethmoid bones, the sphenoid bones, and all the bones that makes up our face. So hopefully you learned something new, and we will see you next time.